Hi, I'm Rick Brimacombe, and on behalf of the Minneapolis Club and my firm, Brimacombe Capital, welcome to Club Entrepreneur. If you didn't already figure it out, today is a joint session between Club E and the Twin Cities chapter of the Exit Planning Institute, otherwise known as the EPI. Our panel discussion today is key employees, recruiting, assessing, and retaining them in today's competitive workplace. But before I get on to the rest of the announcements in our panel, I'd like to introduce the president of the local chapter for the Exit Planning Institute, Julie Keys of Key Strategies. She's an exit planning advisor herself and speaker. Julie, why don't you come on up and tell us a little bit about your group and whatever announcements you have.
Thanks, Rick. Hey, everybody. As Rick said, my name is Julie Keys, and I own a company called Key Strategies, and I'm an exit planner, and I work with business owners and helping them with their transition and exit planning. We're really excited today to have this joint meeting opportunity with Club Entrepreneur. Lots of familiar faces and lots of new faces. So just to let you know, in case you didn't already, we are going to do this again in September, and so we hope that you're pleased and feel like you have a lot of takeaways from this meeting. The September meeting will actually be focused on growth by acquisition. We're going to have some business owners on the panel talking about their experience, so you don't want to miss that one. I'd like to call your attention to the Save the Date flyer that's on your table. The Exit Planning Institute is a nonprofit organization. I'm a volunteer as the president of the chapter, and several of our steering committee members are here. And the Institute is focused on education for professional advisors. So our chapter meeting is kind of a spin-off of what they're trying to do globally, nationally and globally. And we have meetings once a month, and our meeting content is focused on exit planning content. So primarily it's for advisors, but we also keep our doors open for business owners. So if you're an advisor and you have an owner who may be interested in getting to know more about the process of exit planning, you're always welcome, and you don't have to be a member to attend. So take a look at this and see if any of those meetings meet your schedule. I'd just like to really quickly thank the sponsors that support our chapter on an annual basis, and they are Sunbelt Business Advisors, Stiles Financial, Wilkerson Guthman Johnson, Marsh Private Client Services, and Sima Flatamish and Orenstein CPAs. So once again, thanks for being here, and without further ado, I will bring Rick back up. Thanks.
Stealing my pen. Julie, thank you for co-hosting with Club E, and known Julie for a number of years, and I'm sure she would do a wonderful job for you in the event that you have a need with yourself or one of your clients. As far as the Club E sponsors, Olson Thielen CPAs, Irish Titan, Highland Bank, Winthrop and Weinstein, and the Network Connect. Those are our regular Club Entrepreneur, Club E sponsors. So thank you for attending. And then again, also thank you because we did have a little bit of a snafu. We debated that week about the snow, and the weather terrorists, of course, were making it seem like we were going to have 2 feet of snow, but we decided the show was going to go on, and then lo and behold, the Minneapolis Club had a little fire that morning. So anyway, so we ended up here. So thank you for changing your schedules to accommodate us. ClubE.com is the website for my group, and you can learn more about our group there. Our next meeting is May 2nd, which is this Thursday. It's Functional Food Entrepreneurs, 3 entrepreneurs talking about the tales, trials, and tribulations. Uh-oh. Okay, there we go. Killed on me for a moment. Functional Food Entrepreneurs, Trials, and Tribulations. And then May 23rd, we have a panel on acquisitions. So with no further ado, I want to get to our key employees panel today. To my immediate left is Diane Ross Hansen, president of Exit Planning Strategies. In the middle, Chandler McCoy, founding partner and president of M&A Executive Search. And then on the far end, Dr. Heather Johnson, president of Clayson Performance Group. Thank you all for joining us today. And I will give you all an opportunity to tell us a little bit more about your background and fill us in as to why you're here today and how you spend your time. Diane.
And we've got 5 minutes to do it, right? It is a pleasure to be with you today, and in particular with both Heather and Chandler. I've been looking forward to this opportunity to share the stage. Unfortunately, as Rick had mentioned, we were succumbed by a late season weather storm, and then of course the unfortunate fire. And obviously, with this onset of laryngitis, I didn't dare cancel. So bear with me, and I'll give you forewarning. I'm the president and founder of Exit Planning Strategies. We work with owners in the endeavor of building intentional plans for ownership transition. I help direct a multidisciplinary advisory team that helps the owner identify what their objectives are, give them idea of what their planning options are, and the development of an action checklist. Key employee incentive and retention plan is a critical part of any owner's succession, and we'll share that with you as we go on.
Great, thank you. Chandler.
Thank you. Good afternoon. Well, glad to see everybody. My name is Chandler McCoy. I'm founder and president of M&A Executive Search and Consulting. We do three things. We do retained executive search. In that space, we specialize in kind of the manufacturing and food and consumer space. Then we have a consulting division that helps organizations find interim and fractional experts. That's a very industry agnostic space. And then we run CEO roundtables, and that's called Executive Advisory Group. I'm excited to be here too and discuss this subject. I think it's a timely subject. There's some trends that I hope we talk about today, and I look forward to meeting more of you at the end of this discussion.
Great. Dr. Johnson.
All right. Hi, everyone. It's great to be here today. Again, I'm Heather Johnson. I'm the president of the Clausen Performance Group, and we specialize in leadership development. So we help leaders and their teams develop the competencies that they need to succeed and to drive results. So we focus on competencies like influence, emotional intelligence, team building, and then, as we're talking about here today, transitioning. It can be extremely hard to get people on board with big change, and that's where we come in. We help people, help leaders get their teams to buy in, help people move through transition faster, and we'll do that using assessments, we do that using workshops, we do that using full courses. So those are the three ways we typically work with people.
Great, thank you. So we work together to create a list of questions here. So I have some individual questions for the group, and then we have some group questions that would be kind of horizontal to get their feedback on that. With that said, this is intended to be an interactive event today. So if somebody has a question along the way or would like one of the speakers to dive into what they just mentioned a little further, please raise your hand and I will try to get to you as soon as I can. So again, feel free to interact with the panel. And then a reminder for everybody, we have the bar and appetizers afterwards, so please stick around as long as you would like. All right, so Diane, why don't we start with you and just kind of an overall framework question here. Why are middle market business owners turning toward key employee incentive and retention plans these days?
Thank you. You know, if you take a look at unemployment, we have the lowest unemployment right now that the United States has experienced since World War II, 50 years ago. We're under 4%. State of Minnesota is even lower. It's at 3.2%. Our neighbors, Wisconsin, 2.9% unemployment. So again, the marketplace right now, what used to be unions protecting job security and retirement, Forbes magazine did an article that said that the reality in America's labor force today is that competition is the new union. So and in fact, there was a conference board that recently surveyed over 1,000 CEOs, and they all shared that recruiting, retaining key personnel was one of their number one objectives, one of their number one concerns, I should say. So why key employee incentive and retention? When I work with owners, I always say any successful business or transferable business is typically going to be so because of the talent that one or more key performers bring to that organization. They are the talent that helps sustain and grow profitability, oftentimes. They are also very visible to competitors and are often the subject of recruitment. So today, business owners are asking, what can I do to have this talent stay the course? Now, you might think, well, just pay them more. And that certainly is one option. But owners, if you look at it, 40 to 80% of revenue is already going towards salary and benefits for these key executives, plus regulatory limitations prevent owners from really focusing in on their key performers. So developing incentive and retention plans is becoming more the norm than the exception. One of the things from the key employee side that I think is important, what are they looking for? Why are they interested in incentive plans? Now, we might like to take an altruistic opinion and say, well, you know, they want to work someplace where they can make a difference. And I don't mean to belittle that, because that is important. They want to build a secure retirement. They want to pay the least amount of taxes while doing so. But the reality is, key performers are looking to share in the value creation that they help the owner create. And it's their expectation that once shareholders have received a decent rate of return on their investment, that they want a significant upside variable part of their compensation. So thus the reason why, rather than the norm now, rather than the exception, now the norm.
All right, great. Chandler, tell us a little bit about the importance of identifying leadership style, financial experience, public versus private work experience when hiring people.
Yep, great questions. When we are asked to fill a role for a C-suite position, one of the things that we have found that I think companies are challenged with is helping develop a position profile and a strategy in terms of what they're looking for. And so the first thing we ask them to do is review their strategy. Second thing we ask them to do is don't focus on the short-term challenges in the business, and that becomes kind of the profile in what you're looking for. Again, look at your strategy. But one of the other big things that we recommend they look for are leadership, right? What is your leadership style? Or maybe another way to put it is the culture of the business. And we often describe it as, are you a sales-driven culture? Are you an engineering-driven culture, product marketing-driven culture, things of that nature, and on and on. I find that there's a couple ways to look at it. Sometimes they'll say, we want to maintain the culture, and we're very sales-driven, so we want to find somebody who's a very sales-driven kind of personality, or has that kind of a leadership approach. Sometimes they'll say, we want to change the culture, and that right there to me is a bit of a danger signal, because oftentimes we want to change the culture, but as we know, culture doesn't change quickly. So that's certainly something you want to aspire to, but to bring a leader in who doesn't fit your existing culture, or at least can segue very well the existing culture to what you're intending to move towards, is something to really keep an eye on. So you want to talk about looking at leadership experience, or the way we talked about in the question was financial experience, or public versus private. I think you have to think about what is the organization's current culture, and try to stay as close to that as you can when you're developing a position profile and what you're looking for in somebody.
Great, thank you.
Yep.
Heather, leadership wants to make sure that they put people in the right positions or the right chairs, and they know that assessments provide valuable information. What is important to look for in an assessment?
That's a question that a lot of people struggle with. So many people today understand that assessments are a critical part of the hiring process, or even transition, figuring out who belongs in which seat. So they get that it's important. But the question is, how do you know which ones are good? Because there's so many assessments out there. And what I typically tell people is that I look for 3 things when I'm looking for an assessment. First of all, it's got to have strong validity. In other words, it has to measure what it says it measures. If the validity isn't sound, there's no point in looking any further at that assessment. You have to have that. That's the first thing. And then the second thing, as Chandler was saying, you want to know what you're hiring for. Is there a competency model that you're using? What are you looking for? What does this person need to accomplish in this role? So you want to make sure that the assessment that you use isn't just a generic personality test, but that it's relevant to the characteristics or the outcomes you need this person to drive. And then the third thing I look for is ease of use. If you've had any experience with assessments, you know that there's so many different ones out there, and some of them are really, really hard to understand. They've got all kinds of confusing graphs, and it can be very difficult to sort through all of the information and get to the bottom line. So again, the third thing that I look for is it easy to take the information and use it to help you make the decision? So it's validity, it's relevance, and it's ease of use that I recommend.
And then, do you have a favorite or 2 or 3, or too big of a topic to throw out there? It kind of jumped out at me.
I do. I
there.
mean, I've got a favorite for leadership and managers,
Okay.
and a favorite for frontline, and a favorite for
Okay.
sales, and
All right.
yes,
Okay.
there's just so many of them.
Okay, so see you afterwards.
Yes,
right.
exactly. I'd be happy
right.
to share my favorites.
All right.
I have a question for you, Heather.
Yes.
I've read that when owners have key people or individuals that they feel a real sense of loyalty to, maybe because of longevity, whatever, that they tend to be a little bit adverse or hesitant to do assessments. Do you find that in your situation?
I do.
Yeah.
And the best way to overcome that is how you frame it. If you just say, we're going to give everyone an assessment to see who fits in what position or whether they're going to be part of the new organization, they're going to run. Nobody wants to do that. And what happens then is they become very defensive. And it will be kind of like an interview on steroids in terms of how guarded they are. It's not going to give you good information. So you have to frame it in the right way in terms of this being a helpful process. Here's what we're doing. There's no right or wrong answers. It's giving us information, that kind of thing. That's important.
Okay.
All right, great. So Diane, back down here, what are some of the types and must-have design variables for long-term incentive plans?
I always say that there's 2 basic types of incentive plans, a cash-based and a stock-based. Cash-based probably represent about 90% of the incentive plans out there. Stock-based being 10%, both work well at rewarding and retaining key people. But as many of you in the audience can probably imagine, rewarding or incentivizing with stock-based plan to the wrong person at the wrong time for the wrong reason can generally help support our litigation colleagues here attorneys here in the audience. So it can be a recipe for disaster. We've all seen it. So cash-based are definitely the most common. Very simply, there's 4 design variables that I say whether or not the owner has a current plan or is considering implementing a new plan. The first is, how do we identify when an award is made? Now, a lot of times owners will think, well, I'll just wait until the end of the year, see how I think, see how the company did, and just kind of arbitrarily assign a bonus amount. An award amount, not a bonus, an award amount. My first recommendation is that any incentive award should be tied to the attainment of some type of financial benchmark that's measurable, that's subjective, or I should say, subjective, and can be tracked. So it could be an increase in profit. It could be an EBITDA. It can be as simple or whatever you care. But have it tied to the attainment of some type of financial benchmark that, when achieved, is going to help increase enterprise value. That's the first variable. The second is that the incentive award has to be substantial. What's substantial? In today's marketplace, has to have the potential of 25% of salary to really influence behavior. The third is that that award should not be outright cash, which in most cases it is. At least 50% of the award should be deferred for 3 years, 5 years, whatever the owner decides. Therein lies the retention. And then the last is communication. If we don't communicate the plan and how award is earned clearly, oftentimes it'll fall flat and not give the owner the type of results they're looking for. So cash, stock-based have 4 design variables.
Great. Playing off of the variable question with compensation, Chandler, tell us a little bit about the importance of aligning the compensation with the size of the organization.
Yeah, it's a great question. I think that's kind of self-explanatory in some cases, right? If you're a large organization, you're looking to hire people from another similar sized large organization, and most often human resources departments have done compensation studies, so that all aligns. The question probably is better put when you're an organization that's maybe growing, or you're a small organization trying to recruit from a different size organization, maybe a large one. And then the question is well, you're a $100 million company, but you're hoping to be, maybe you're hoping to double or triple. And the people you're trying to recruit from happen to come from much larger organizations. So does your compensation fit? So it's not an easy answer, Rick. It's, does it always fit the size of the organization? It really should fit really what the need of the position is. And then the question is what's the right number? And that's really a question for the organization as they grow. So I think it depends on the situation, and it really depends on what the need of the role is.
Okay. Chandler, let's stay with you. When looking to hire a new CEO or executive leader, why is it important to share things like company culture, strategic vision, challenges, things like significant growth, turnaround, operational challenges, et cetera?
So one of the first things you mentioned, why do you want to share it? I think that's goes without saying, is they want to understand the strategy and the focus of what they're being hired to do. We talked a little bit about communication. Communication is so important, and very often we don't see it taking place as well as it should, and we hire people like Heather to come in and help really make sure that gap occurs. The gap meaning bringing a new leader in, and how do they really integrate into an organization that is a brand new culture to them? How do they work with this new team? How do they find a new mentor internally, things of that nature? Why is it important to share company culture and strategic vision and challenges? I suppose that's somewhat self-explanatory, but it's not. I don't think it's carried out very well in a lot of cases, especially with an executive external hire. There's a difference between an internal promotion and an executive hire from the outside. It's a very high rate of. It's a high rate that doesn't work out. Some studies say as many as 40% of executive hires from the outside don't work out. And if you look into it further, why? It's what you're talking about. It's integrating this person into this new culture. And oftentimes it comes down to this question of communication. Communicating culture, strategic vision, challenges. Do we know what the 90-day plan is? Sometimes they don't even have that outlined. Simple questions like, how are you going to meet the people? Let me put it another way. One of the first things we tell people to do, or recommend they do, is introduce themselves to the team before they start working. Why is that? Because it's not about the first day. It's all about the relationship you're building with them. And you don't want first day to be your first day. You want that to be about your 5th day, maybe your 6th day, whatever the number is, right? So communication, like everything else. But having someone on the team that can help do this. In our case, we actually tie it. We have a guarantee as our search. You have a 1-year guarantee for a search, but we tie that guarantee to the company taking us up on using a coach to integrate them into the organization, because we have found that when they don't, leave it to their own devices, and what I mean by that is they're just busy, right? As soon as you join the new organization, everyone's head down and working, trying to move forward, and oftentimes what happens is we forget to keep our eye on the ball in terms of what that 90-day, 100-day plan is and how it's supposed to be achievable, and that's what we use an executive coach to help with. So, hope that
Can I
helps.
add one piece to that?
Absolutely.
Because you're talking about communicating vision, mission, values, all of that, and it's so incredibly important. One thing psychologists will tell you is that an uncertain brain is a threatened brain. When we are uncertain about something, we feel threatened. When we feel threatened, we typically go into fight or flight. And what can happen is you can have good people. You can have somebody that Chandler brought in, and he's perfect for the position, but now doesn't really understand what's going on and feels threatened. The best people are the first ones to leave. So if they don't have that information, if they don't understand where things are going, you are at a risk of losing them. And you mentioned even meeting people. Again, think an uncertain brain is a threatened brain. You want to give people as much information as quickly as you can and consistently. Don't just say it once and think they've got it. It's got to be again and again and again. Then they're no longer spending energy on protecting themselves and thinking, did I make the right decision in being part of this organization? And they can get to work. And you want them working on the right things. So you want them working on what's going to help achieve the vision, consistent with the values and all of that. So that's just one more piece of it, and psychologically why this is so important.
I have a question as well. Chandler, you said that 40% of the executive hires don't turn out. Is that what you said?
External hires.
External hires.
There are studies that say 40% of external hires at the C-suite level in particular, but VP level and above, don't work out.
Do you have any idea of how long it takes for either them or the organization to determine that it's not a fit? I'm curious. Timeline.
Timeline, yeah, it's generally within a year and sometimes less. But oftentimes it gets stretched out, and that isn't helpful, right? If it isn't working out, now it's 18 months. Think of all the things that could have been accomplished as opposed to not accomplished.
The other thing I saw on LinkedIn is a quote that I found interesting. It said that by not offering some type of additional benefit to those key or C-level recruits, it costs the company as much as 400% of the key person's base salary to recruit, retain, and replace them. 400%. So that's a tricky thing. Identifying them, communicating, training.
And did you say that was recruit, replace, and retrain?
Yeah.
So in that figure is not the opportunity cost, as they are.
No,
That's the big number.
no.
Right. So
Yeah.
some multiple of that
Isn't
gets
that
to be a pretty
crazy?
scary number.
Yeah, that's crazy.
All right, Diane, one over here, Julie.
Just related to what you were just talking about, do you happen to know, any of you happen to know what the current M&A integration failure rate is? Because I know it's high, like, aside from just executive.
Boy, how about somebody in the audience?
Go ahead. Yeah.
Meg.
KPMG does a study every other year on mergers and acquisitions, and I work with that group in New York, and I know that the 6 years I was at KPMG, the number hovered around 85 to 87% of mergers and acquisitions don't work because of the lack of post-merger integration strategy.
That's
Wow.
a scary number. All right, thank you for sharing, Meg. Thanks for the question, Julie. All right, down here, Diane, let's come back to you. Talk a little bit about how long-term incentive plans integrate with the exit planning for business owners.
Yeah, and this is actually fairly brief. When you talk about value drivers within an organization, there are so many, and many of you in the audience know exactly what those are. But incentivizing and retaining key personnel, mentoring, training key personnel is going to add value or make an otherwise lifestyle sort of business into a transferable business, whether or not it's an internal or an external transition. If it's an external transition that the owner is considering, most of us can recognize the fact that any outside buyer is not only looking at the fundamentals of the company, but they're trying to also ascertain what is their risk level in making this purchase. And in doing so, one of those is how long or how sustainable is profitability beyond the dependence on the owner themselves. So developing a key bench, motivating them, retaining, incentivizing them on an external transition is critical. internal transition, equally critical in my experience, because again, if you've ever spoken with me in private or public, internal transitions have two major challenges. Let's call it one major challenge. Anybody want to take a guess that doesn't know this answer? Money. Most of your internal buyers do not have capital, nor are they probably have access to capital. So by having a incentive-based plan with a deferred portion set aside, that deferred bucket is often used as an initial purchase for partial stock ownership. And that's generally going to be a very gradual one. It's going to be earned and bought over time so that as the key executive group get to maybe 20, 25%, they've got sustainability, responsibility in leading the company. Now they can go to our banks and say, we want to cash out or buy out the owner. So the incentive plan is critical on both the internal as well as the external transition plans, in my opinion.
Great. Let's jump down to you, Heather. We've talked about communication a couple of times and how important it is, especially during transitions where it's so critical. What are some tips for communicating with teams?
Well, we talked about one already, how important it is to communicate the who we are and where we're going piece of this. Everybody needs to understand that. And all the way through the company, everybody needs to understand their connection. How do I, on a daily basis, contribute to achieving the vision, the mission, the values? They need to feel valued, in other words, and like they are adding value, they are contributing. That's huge. Going back also to the anxiety that inevitably comes with change and certainly transitions. The bigger the transition, the more anxiety people are going to have to deal with. As leaders, you can play an enormous role in helping lead through that anxiety by being in front of people regularly. In other words, they need to see leaders on a regular basis. That's one piece of it. Listening is critical, and it's hard for a lot of people to do, especially in the chaos that often accompanies transitions. People are moving at 100 miles an hour and they think, I don't have time to stop and say, how are you doing with this transition? And yet, if you do take that time, it makes a world of difference in terms of helping people manage that anxiety and uncovering what's holding them back. Fears that they have, challenges that they have. So an enormous part of the communication is just listening to people and taking the time to say, how is this working for you? Transparency is another piece of this that's essential today. We have to give as much information as we can and do it honestly, even if that means saying to somebody, I don't have the answer right now, but as soon as we know that, I'll share that with you. Or even as soon as I can share that, I will. So the more frequently you're in front of people, the more often you're communicating, the more you're listening, the more people will believe what you have to say when you're being transparent.
Great, thank you. In a related but slightly different question, you talked about anxieties, uncertainty, fears, those kinds of things. Certainly, folks are getting nervous during transitions, big transitions. What about the trust factor? How do you build trust when people are guarded and suspicious and have anxiety?
Well, communication is a great way to build trust, and all the things that we just talked about with communication will help do that. In addition to that, being present helps build trust. Being open, as I said, helps build trust. Giving as much information as you can. All of those things are going to help build trust. Another key piece of this is to do what you say you will every single time. So if you tell people you're going to keep them in the loop, you better keep them in the loop. If you tell people you're going to have an answer by next Friday, the answer needs to be there by next Friday. In other words, the more times you do what you say you're going to do, especially during a chaotic or stressful time, the more trust you're going to build. So that's essential.
Great, thank you. Again, if somebody has a question, raise your hand and I'll work you in. Okay, shifting gears to kind of a question for the whole panel, whoever wants to jump in and tackle it and interact amongst yourselves, no particular order. One of the things with Club E is that we try to provide actionable content. So what's kind of one thing that our audience can take with them to share with either their own team or their clients or whatnot that business owners should be remembering to do something kind of sooner rather than later? So not like end of the year planning, like tomorrow, next week, next month, not something, hey, 6 months from now or 2020 or whatever.
Well, I can jump in here on this.
Please do.
One of the things that we've been talking about transitions and getting the right people in the right seats, but if you're just talking too about day to day, develop your people. Have a development plan for people. All employees want development these days. The younger the employee, the more they want it. I just saw a survey recently that said 94% of employees are asking for it, and it's one of the key retention strategies right now. So I would ask, do you have a development plan? And if not, make one.
I'll add to one thing. So when it comes to communicating, you can tie this to some of the same subjects you talked about. Compensation, whether or not they're meeting targets, whether or not they're aligned with leadership. The organizations that I've worked with that I see do this really, really well, first of all, they have regular meetings that communicate what the plan is and what the targets are. But they go beyond that by having, oftentimes they'll either have television screens up with metrics that tie everybody into whether or not they're meeting the targets or not. So it goes back to this issue of communication and compensation. So what I see often happen is compensation plans that are really convoluted or difficult to understand. But if they don't know how they're going to affect the enterprise value, for instance, of an organization, how they really, day to day, how can they affect enterprise value if that's one of the key drivers for this? I've seen companies do it, right? They say this is what they're using metrics to drive towards a specific number at the end of the year. There's nothing wrong with wanting to say that this is one of our key goals, is maybe you don't use the word enterprise value, but maybe you do. And the best way you can do it is communicating regularly in staff meetings. And secondly, the ones that I see do it really well, again, is they actually put TV screens up where they have something that comes to them in an email or something like that that has metrics tied to whether or not they're meeting these goals.
I think my one takeaway would be, do you in fact have any sort of a selective retention and incentive plan? A lot of times when I'm working with owners, I'll ask, do you have an incentive plan? The answer is, yeah, we have one. And I'll ask, okay, well, is it tied to any type of attainment of financial benchmark? Well, no, it's kind of just how the end of the year turns up. There's a big difference between a seasonal bonus across the board and a true key employee incentive and retention plan. A big, big difference. If properly designed, the benefit of it is that it's going to create a unified financial vision for the company that's going to end up being a win-win for both the company as well as the key executive. If properly designed, the incentive and retention plan is going to erase any type of entitlement mentality that often sets in without clearly defined parameters and without clear communication as to how this plan works and what the purpose is. So evaluate what you've got, even if you've got something in place.
Okay. Kind of flip side of that coin. So if we're talking about things that business owners can do in your various years of experience as guides and solution providers, the flip side would be, what's the mistake, whether it's the biggest mistake or the most common mistake that you see?
Well, what I see, actually one of the trends in my space is that it's referred to in my business as succession projects. Succession project is a company calls us and they say, I'm the owner or I'm the CEO and I don't have a successor. That's a succession project. Find me somebody who can succeed me, and they need to come on board in a role that's, generally a level below them, and then they move into that role. So what they're not doing is they're not building bench strength. And everyone's heard this and it's talked about a lot, and it's tough to do with small, mid-sized companies. But in order for when it comes to retention, that's one of the key ways to retain people is show them a path. Show them a path to the next level and develop a path. Develop people who can go that place. But I can tell you that I'll bet half of our searchers right now are succession projects. Yeah.
Do you find that the path changes frequently? Because I find in the companies that I work with all of the reorganizations, one of the things that will happen is people see that path and they're moving on that path and planning and developing, and they're doing all the right things, and then the company gets shaken up and that path changes, and suddenly they're saying, wait a minute, everything I was doing to get from here to here, now what? Now where am I going? And so one of the things that I find is helpful, in addition to here's your steps along this path, is here are some key competencies to develop that you can use no matter if you go this way, or if the snow globe gets shaken up and everything's messed up. This will still be valuable. So keeping both of those things in mind, I think. Are you finding that the path changes frequently?
Certainly, we see it, of course, when it doesn't work out.
Yeah.
Right? And so we do see it, actually, yeah. very
Okay.
often. Yeah, absolutely. So last year, we did 5 president CEO searches. Half of those were succession projects. And it's not just the C-suite. Small, mid-sized organizations just don't have the talent pools to often pull from. So it's vice president level, it's director level, and it goes down. And it's tough to build, but I think if, what I see is smaller, what I do see successfully done by small companies is they're building levels. It's the same person, but they're promoting them from an individual contributor to a senior individual contributor to maybe to an associate manager, and they have these incremental steps, but it develops the person, and also the company has been forced to develop a plan to educate them and pull them along the organization. So.
Yeah.
So when you say successor hires, successor for leadership, is that also successor for ownership?
Succession for ownership? No, I wouldn't say that's the case.
Okay,
No, not
Okay.
necessarily for ownership.
it's leadership.
It's leadership, yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right.
So the original question, not that was a good conversation, but just Diane, to remind you, is the biggest mistake that owners typically make. If somebody else wanted to chime in there.
In my experience, I think probably the biggest mistake owners make, other than having a well-designed long-term incentive plan, is make it a stock-based incentive plan where they use stock or actual equity position to recruit a key talent that they envision may take over ownership, where they feel as though that they've got to throw that into the compensation mix in order to really retain or recruit or interest this candidate or key performer. That is the biggest mistake that I see. And it can turn out, but that would be the exception, where rather the owner should have probably concentrated more on cash base, which can even include phantom stock, which acts and looks exactly like equity, but doesn't create the hassle of having a minority owner.
One more real quick. So one of the bigger mistakes I see with these, being Club E, I assume there's some small, maybe mid-sized companies. One of the biggest issues we see when we're asked to come in and do a CEO search or a C-suite search, if you're a small, mid-sized organization, that person's probably been in the role for 15, 20, 25 years. And guess what? They were first the director of manufacturing, and then they became the engineering person, and then they became the salesperson. And they say to me, you need to find one of me. So you want them to be an expert in sales, engineering, and operations. Mm-hmm. That's often, that's a request that's often used, and it just isn't realistic. So I think what people have to understand is, when you're replacing yourself, you're probably going to replace yourself with more than one person. You're going to have to break down what you've done and really understand what you've done, because it's a misconception. They don't really realize that there aren't people out there with those skills, and it happens a lot.
Okay, so two mistakes that I
Right.
tend to see. One would be just in the developmental world, an ongoing development. Big mistake is I don't have time, I'll do it later. There will never be a good time to take off and focus on your development. There just won't be. So you gotta just do it, prioritize it for yourself and for your team. And then the second that I see around transitions is leaders forgetting this psychological piece of it with people and thinking, I just need to tell them the nuts and the bolts and they'll get on board. That's just not how we're wired. We have to remember the psychology behind it too. And to the degree you understand what moves people, what helps them buy in, these transitions are going to be a lot more effective and a lot faster. So again, mistake is forgetting that piece of it or just not wanting to deal with it because it's messy. You've got to address it.
Great, thank you. So as you look backward in the rear view mirror, what kind of trends or themes are you seeing today that weren't around, say, 3, 4, 5 years ago?
One trend I'm seeing is around development. And just every year, it seems like more and more people are saying, I want to be developed. Another piece of that some people squirm about sometimes is people more often saying, I want to know that I'm valued and that my leader cares about me as an individual, not just what I produce. So those are two things that I'm seeing
Okay.
more and more frequently.
So I'll pick up on this. So I mentioned one already, succession projects. We talked about that. Another one is, it may be a bit overused, but now it's really being utilized, is this whole issue of culture fit. I think we've all talked about culture fit, and when it comes down to a critical hire, you maybe have two or three candidates, and it usually comes down to what? Culture fit. But in the past, it had been more of a gut feel, and more organizations are leaning on industrial psychology assessments to make these tough decisions. And we went to developing our own proprietary culture assessment. And it's not a pitch, it's just to tell you that one assessment has been one of the biggest wins for us, because I can't tell you how many people, they just sit back and they almost have a sigh of relief to know that we can help them understand what their culture is and to make sure we find someone who fits that culture. So that's probably one of the bigger trends, is this piece around culture fit is not a new thing and it's almost overused, but I think the way we're able to assess it and do a better job of making sure we have a good fit.
Better than a gut check?
Better than a gut check, but that's still a piece of it. Yep.
Diane?
I think as far as trends, and particularly with my focus on the development of key employee incentive and retention plans, I guess the only trend that I see is that they're becoming much more the norm than the exception. I think once we as an economy got through 2008, 2009, and all of a sudden people brought their head back up, I think that the demand and the activity in recruiting key talent, oftentimes as it integrates with an owner's plan for ownership transition, is skyrocketing.
Okay, so if we shift from looking in the rear view mirror to looking in your crystal ball, so we look forward and we say, hey, over the next couple of years, what kind of trends or themes do you see emerging as we look forward?
I'll just start real quick. So the biggest one is going to be difficulty in finding the right talent. It's not as if we can't find people, but it's harder and harder to find the right people. And my space has changed. It's not as if anybody here can't do what we do for a living. It just takes a lot of time and effort. There's a certain amount of knowledge and intrinsic experience, but it's changed, because what we used to be known for is going to our database and finding someone and recommending them. Our industry's changed. We don't just recommend people. We find you the right people. We make sure they fit, and we make sure they work out long term. So we're real more about, that's one of the big changes kind of moving forward, is finding people who fit. But getting back to your question, it's finding them. It's tough to find the right people. It's not just finding people.
Okay.
Yeah.
I would say I keep running into looking at different characteristics going forward in people with more AI, with more things being automated, with more customers now looking online instead of wanting to talk to people, that the differentiator between the machines or the automation and people, that differentiator really is empathy and being able to connect with people. So I find at all levels, even healthcare, doctors, they're looking more at teaching empathy and looking for people who naturally have empathic skills, and then also how do you develop these in people so that when somebody actually does come face to face with your company, or even you're working with a team, they have this ability to empathize, to understand, and really connect with people.
Diane, anything?
Crystal ball, let me think. Again, in employee incentive and retention plans, it's financial based. If you take a look at the workforce, most of your employee benefits today are meant to be non-discriminatory for the benefit of all employees, which is a good thing. But the reality is that as key talent salary increases, they become discriminated against in most employee benefits. And when they look to retire, less and less percentage of their income replacement is coming from either employee or employer and government subsidies in the form of Social Security, et cetera. So trends I see, or crystal ball, is that in order to recruit, retain key talent, it's going to almost require owners to have some type of a benefit beyond the standard one offered.
Okay. As we're getting closer to 5 o'clock, not that there was a hard stop, but I just watching the time here. Any other questions out in the audience? Yes, over here.
Heather, you mentioned development a couple times as being a growing trend and a growing request. Are you finding any difference in the various age groups, millennials or those older, as to what they mean by development?
The question, if you didn't hear it in the back, was about development, and we've had that come up with a couple of our panelists today, and the question was, does development change, or does the definition for what development means as you have different generational groups?
The short answer is absolutely. At the one end of the spectrum, you're going to have people who are more apt to pick up a book. On the other end, book? I want an online course. I want an app. I want something that can be done through my phone. So the challenge is then to address everybody. And how can you do that? In our world, we're finding that we still do classroom type development, face-to-face development, but now there's such a demand for online that we are starting to put our courses online as well and have more of a hybrid, because that is a trend going forward. Yeah, big differences.
Anybody else want to chime in on that one? No? Other questions? Julie?
So Diane, you had said earlier with regard to internal transfers that building some kind of deferred account would help an internal buyer be able to eventually buy into the company over time. Well, what if we don't have that? Like, what is your best, solution to that?
Okay, that's a good question. And that is the case where one of the questions that I'll say to an owner is, okay, first of all, you want to try to figure out a way to transition to internal people, whether that's family members, key employees, or some type of a group. If the owner says, I'm ready now, my suggestion is, in particular with family members, rather than just gifting or giving ownership, even if it's key managers, still, in my opinion, the transfer can be stock-based immediately, but it shouldn't just be a bonus. It should still be tied to the attainment of some type of financial metric. And the only difference is that you don't have anything deferred. You're immediately rewarding that key group with actual equity. You can do it with non-voting to keep some of the rights limited, if you will, but it would just be an immediate versus a deferred. Still absolutely should be tied to accomplishment. Yes?
Follow-up question to that then. So seller carry then most of the time, or do you see a combination?
So the question, if you didn't hear it in the back, was, does the seller carry that?
The financing. Okay, now remember, if we've got an incentive award, if we meet the formula, rather than cash, they're going to receive a stock bonus. The good question. if the award, I'm just going to use an example, is 50 grand, and that'll buy one share in the company, the employee gets one share that year based on the award. If they need to buy 40%, absolutely they've got to do seller financing when the owner is ready to sell. And at that point, it's either SBA, bank, rich relatives.
And I don't want to put words in your mouth, but what I thought I heard was, let's say the bonus was 50 grand, or let's make it 60, 50 goes towards the one share of stock, and there's 10,000 cash. So was your question a blend of what the employee would receive?
Well, that, and if it was an immediate need that the owner, like one of the 5Ds hits, right?
Yep.
And the owner's got to exit for whatever reason. So at that point, it sounds to me like the owner would just end up having to carry if they couldn't get
Yeah.
financing and
Yeah.
didn't have their own cash requirement.
Correct.
met. Yeah.
Correct.
Yeah.
Yes, over here.
What's the 5Ds?
5 Ds. Julie, what are the 5 Ds?
Death, divorce, disagreement, disability, and disaster.
And did you hear that in the back? Death, divorce, disability, disaster,
Dum,
and
dum, dum.
disagreement. Never had any of those, have we? Or the other way, check, check, check. Trifecta, big winners. All right. Okay, other questions? No other questions. All right, so to wrap things up, we'll get to our appetizers and the bar and more networking. To kind of sum everything up for everybody, kind of a lightning round, if you will, kind of 30, 60 seconds to give folks a couple of takeaway tidbits for our talk today on key employees.
I'll throw that out is that for most business owners, what they're trying to do is to build enterprise value in order to enjoy transitioning and living their financial freedom and legacy goals and objectives. And when they're looking to build value, while there's many drivers they can focus on, incentive and retention of key personnel, in my opinion, is one of the most important.
So I usually see this on the other side when it doesn't work out. So but I guess my 2 cents would be around educating, building education plan or an opportunity plan for them to stay within the organization, and certainly communicate with them so they know how they're contributing to the organization. So I do see it work is generally it's where the organization's doing a really, really good job of communication.
Okay.
Yep.
So when it comes to keeping employees engaged and maximizing the productivity of the team that you've got, it's important to communicate regularly. It's important to develop them so they keep growing. It's important to make them feel valued. That's all the time. When you're transitioning, big or small, it's that much more important because it's a time of chaos. So make sure you're focusing on your people.
Great. Julie, tell me again when the next EPI meeting is.
Next EPI meeting is May 9th, so next Thursday?
May 9th? Next Thursday. And then the next Club E meeting is this Thursday, May 2nd, Functional Food Entrepreneurs. And where do you host your regular meetings?
We meet at the, so we move around a little bit. The next meeting will be at the Minnesota Society of CPAs in Bloomington. And then a couple meetings after that, June and August, will be downtown at Simulfron Mission Orenstein. And then one thing I forgot to mention was we're doing another joint event in October, not just the one in September here, but the one in October that's a bigger event for business owners, and it's called the Owners Forum. It's our 3rd annual Owners Forum, a very big deal. Last year we had it at the Carlson School of Management. This year it's at St. Thomas, and the Family Business Center will be involved as well. So it's not open to advisors if they don't bring a business owner. So if you decide that you'd like to come, if you're an advisor, you're welcome to come as long as you bring a business owner. If you're a business owner in the room, we'd love to have you there. Great content, so just want to plug that to it.
Yeah, so you can see Julie for that. You can see me, I'm involved. Todd in the back, raise your hand, Todd. Todd's also on that team. Again, Club E is Thursday, May 2nd, Functional Food Entrepreneurs, and then May 23rd with acquisitions. My meetings are generally here. Thank you for coming. Enjoy the bar and the happy hours. Thank you.